My name is Amelia Hartwell, and the night I almost drank that wine was the night everything unraveled. Family dinners aren't supposed to feel like traps. They're meant to be warm, familiar, filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and the comforting clatter of cutlery against plates. But from the moment I stepped into Evelyn Hartwell's spotless dining room that rainy Sunday evening, I knew something was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Evelyn was far too polished for that, but the kind of wrong you feel in your chest before your mind catches up. The kind of wrong that whispers, "You shouldn't be here." Evelyn is my mother-in-law. To the outside world, she's the picture of English grace, elegant, articulate, endlessly composed. But to me, she's something else entirely. Beneath the silk scarves and pearls lies a woman who never wanted me in her family. Not really. She smiles with her teeth, compliments with venom, and wields silence like a blade. Still, I never thought she would try to hurt me. That night, the dinner table was set like something out of a magazine. White linen napkins, crystal wine glasses, candles flickering in antique holders. Evelyn had prepared everything herself. A first. "Just a little thank you," she said, "for being such a lovely part of our family." Her voice dripped with sweetness, but her eyes, they watched me too closely. When she handed me a glass of red wine, already poured, something in my gut twisted. "Merlot," she said with a smile. "I know it's your favorite." It wasn't. I took the glass anyway, because what else could I do? I smiled back, thanked her, sat down. But my fingers trembled as they held the stem. I couldn't explain it, couldn't prove anything, but every instinct inside me screamed not to drink. So when she turned her back to fetch the lamb, I did something impulsive. I reached across the table and swapped glasses with her husband, my father-in-law, Jeffrey. He didn't notice. No one did. We clinked glasses, said a toast, and carried on as if everything was normal. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, Jeffrey collapsed, just crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Chaos erupted. Evelyn's face drained of color. She knelt beside him, hands shaking, voice trembling, calling his name. But something in her panic felt performative. And in that moment, I knew she hadn't just cooked dinner that night. She had planned something, and I wasn't supposed to walk away from that table. My name is Amelia Hartwell, and this is the story of how I uncovered the truth about the woman who nearly poisoned me, and what happened when I gave her a taste of her own intentions. The first time I met Evelyn Hartwell, she greeted me with a kiss on each cheek and eyes so cold I felt them long after we parted. She was poised, polite, but every word she spoke to me carried a hidden edge, a quiet appraisal. I was dating her son Thomas at the time, and from the beginning, I understood. I was under review. I didn't come from the kind of family that held titles or owned summer estates in Cornwall. I was raised by a single mom in Manchester, earned my way through university with part-time jobs and scholarships. I wasn't one of them, and Evelyn knew it. At first, the tension between us was subtle, a missed invitation, a strained smile, a dig disguised as a joke. "Oh, Amelia, such an unconventional background." "You must have such interesting stories." Or, "You do make an impression, don't you?" It was like playing a game where only one person knew the rules, and that person was determined to see you lose. Thomas, bless him, never noticed. He believed his mother to be demanding, yes, but also dignified. "She's just old-fashioned," he'd say, brushing off the chill in her voice. "She's hard on everyone. It's how she shows she cares." But I wasn't convinced that care should feel so much like combat. By the time Thomas proposed, the tension had evolved. Evelyn didn't protest openly, that wasn't her style, but the undercurrents were unmistakable. The way she tightened her jaw when I mentioned our wedding plans, the carefully veiled comments about waiting until you're really ready and hoping Thomas doesn't rush into anything emotional. She wanted control, and I was disruption. Even after we married, the pressure didn't stop. Evelyn would drop by unannounced. She'd rearrange things in our flat, just tidying, or accidentally order throw pillows in colors I'd mentioned I hated. During dinners, she'd steer the conversation to topics I wasn't familiar with, then feign surprise at my lack of knowledge. It was death by 1,000 passive-aggressive cuts. The worst part? She was always polite. On the surface, we were a picture-perfect family. Evelyn never shouted, never insulted me outright. Instead, she used silence, disapproval, and precision. Every word was calculated, every compliment a warning. And through it all, I began to feel watched, not just scrutinized, observed, like I was being tested constantly, and she was waiting for me to fail. So when we received that Sunday dinner invitation, I should have known something was wrong. Evelyn never hosted without reason, and she never smiled without a motive. But I was tired of playing the good daughter-in-law. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe this dinner was her attempt to make peace. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let go of the tension. I was wrong. That dinner would be the culmination of everything she'd been building, a plan she'd stitched together over years of carefully hidden resentment, and I was walking straight into it. The invitation came in the form of a cream-colored card, tucked inside an envelope and slid through our letterbox like a whisper. Evelyn didn't text. She didn't call. She invited, always formally, always like it was a performance. The front of the card was embossed with golden cursive, "Dinner at Hartwell House," as if we were attending some high society gathering instead of a simple family meal. I stared at it for a long time before saying anything. It wasn't just a dinner invitation. It was a signal. Evelyn never invited us for dinner without a reason. Every gathering she hosted came with an agenda, even if she disguised it behind Yorkshire puddings and perfectly arranged centerpieces. Thomas was delighted, of course. "She's making an effort," he said, waving the card like it was proof. "She probably wants to patch things up. You know how she gets. Distant, cold, whatever. But she's your mother-in-law, Amelia. She's trying." I smiled and nodded, but the pit in my stomach didn't budge. Evelyn didn't try, not unless she had something to gain. Still, I agreed to go. I told myself I was being unfair, suspicious. Maybe, after all this time, she really did want peace. Maybe the tension had worn her down too. The day of the dinner, it rained, not the gentle kind, but a heavy, persistent downpour that made the countryside roads to the Hartwell estate feel even more isolated. I stared out the car window as we drove, watching the trees blur by, the windshield wipers beating like a countdown. The closer we got, the tighter my chest felt. The Hartwell estate sat at the end of a long, winding drive lined with yew trees, a grand stone house with ivy crawling up its walls and windows that always seemed too dark. It was beautiful, in a distant sort of way, cold beauty, like its owner. Evelyn opened the door herself, a rare gesture. She looked immaculate, as always, hair pinned perfectly, a silk blouse the color of bone, lips painted red, but not a smudge out of place. "Amelia," she said with a slow, deliberate smile. "Thomas, welcome. Come in. You must be soaked." She led us inside, where the dining room table was already set. Silver cutlery gleamed, candles flickered. A roast was in the oven, and something fragrant, rosemary, lemon, lingered in the air. Too perfect, too timed. "I thought we'd keep it intimate," she said, ushering us to the sitting room. "Just the four of us. Jeffrey and Joan will be joining us, of course." Then she turned to me and added, "It'll be nice to have some proper family time, don't you think?" I smiled, but her words lingered longer than they should have. Proper family time. As if I hadn't quite belonged before. As if this night were a test, or worse, a final judgment. And the moment she handed me that glass of wine, I knew I was right. The moment she handed me the wine glass, I knew something was wrong. Evelyn approached me with that familiar, practiced smile, the one she wore like armor. It didn't reach her eyes, never did. She held 2 glasses of red wine by the stem, her manicured fingers curved around the crystal like talons. "Merlot," she said lightly. "Your favorite, isn't it?" I hesitated. She noticed. Her head tilted ever so slightly, the way a cat might before pouncing on something it already knows is broken. "Come now," she added. "You do drink Merlot, don't you, Amelia?" I took the glass. I had to. Refusing would have sparked a moment, one she'd savor, one she'd twist into a story of how I was rude, dramatic, or perhaps unwell. So I smiled, said thank you, and sat down at the long oak table beneath her antique chandelier. The others, Thomas, Evelyn's husband Jeffrey, and her sister-in-law Joan, were already seated. The room was warm, filled with the aroma of rosemary roast lamb and a hint of expensive perfume that clung to Evelyn like a trademark. But I felt cold. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the wine glass in front of me. It wasn't the wine itself that unsettled me. It was everything about it. Why had she poured it in the kitchen and brought it out rather than pouring at the table like she always did? Why did she make sure I received a specific glass, not just hand them out at random? I glanced around. Everyone else's glasses were slightly different, similar in design, but not identical. Mine had a thicker stem, a slightly deeper bowl. It wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it, and I was. Evelyn sat across from me. She raised her own glass, watching me as the others chatted about the new conservatory Jeffrey wanted to build. I lifted mine halfway, then set it down. "I'll wait until we toast," I said softly. She smiled again, but this time her eyes narrowed just a touch. "Suit yourself." The dinner carried on, but I barely heard a word. My mind was racing. Was I being paranoid? Suspicious without cause? Or was this the moment my gut had been warning me about for months? Then came the switch. When Evelyn stood to retrieve the mint sauce from the kitchen, I acted quickly. Jeffrey's attention was on Joan, and Thomas was asking about football. No one was watching. I leaned forward and gently swapped my glass with Jeffrey's, careful not to clink or spill a drop. My heart pounded in my chest as if it were trying to warn me again, louder this time. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't even fully believe she would do something. It felt absurd, outrageous. But 20 minutes later, Jeffrey's face would go pale. His hands would begin to tremble, and the glass I was never meant to drink from would fall from his fingers as he collapsed onto the floor. And Evelyn would scream, a little too late and a little too well. It wasn't some grand strategy or premeditated move. It was instinct, sharp, raw, and undeniable. The kind that kicks in just before something terrible happens. Maybe it was fear or survival. But when Evelyn left the dining room to check on the lamb, I acted without thinking. Thomas and Jeffrey were mid-conversation about property taxes and garden renovations. Joan was scrolling through her phone, not bothering to hide her disinterest. No one was looking at me. My hands moved quickly, quietly. I slid my wine glass toward Jeffrey's place setting, and with a subtle flick of my wrist, swapped it with his. The glasses were similar but not identical. Mine had a thicker stem and a slight smudge on the rim where I'd touched it earlier. His was pristine, untouched. I held my breath. No one noticed. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My throat was dry, my palms clammy. I kept my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I looked around, searching for any sign that I was being ridiculous, paranoid. But Evelyn's voice echoed faintly from the kitchen, calm and controlled, humming along to a classical piece she'd put on low in the background. Why had I done that? Why did I feel like I'd just committed some kind of betrayal? I stared at the glass now sitting in front of Jeffrey. What if I was wrong? What if there was nothing in that wine at all? Maybe she had poured it in the kitchen simply out of habit. Maybe this whole thing, the tension, the suspicion, the cold smiles, was all in my head. What if I just allowed fear to poison my own judgment? And yet, something inside me screamed to hold steady. Then Evelyn returned. She walked in with a silver tray of mint sauce and roast potatoes, smiling as if nothing had happened. But her eyes flicked to my wine glass. I saw it, just for a second, a hesitation, a glitch in her performance. Her gaze caught on the glass in front of me, then darted to Jeffrey. She blinked, smiled wider. "Is everyone enjoying the wine?" Jeffrey nodded. Lovely, Evelyn. Bold, earthy. She barely acknowledged him. Her focus was back on me now, but I didn't flinch. I picked up his glass, the one meant for me, and tilted it slightly, letting the wine swirl without ever touching my lips. "It's very nice," I said smoothly. Evelyn's smile froze just for a heartbeat. Then she turned and began ladling sauce onto plates. Dinner continued. Conversation resumed. But something had shifted in the air. A silent countdown had begun. And though no one else could hear it, I could feel each tick echo in my bones. Whatever Evelyn had planned, the game had just changed. Jeffrey dabbed his forehead with his napkin. Once, then again. "Bit warm in here, isn't it?" he said with a strained chuckle, loosening his collar. At first, we thought nothing of it. The roast was rich, the candles were burning, and the rain outside had given the room a damp, heavy warmth. But then his voice changed. Slower, softer, like it had to push its way out of his throat. He tried to stand. His chair scraped awkwardly, one leg catching the edge of the rug. He wobbled, then sat back down heavily. "Sorry," he murmured, blinking too quickly. "Just need a moment." I watched Evelyn. Her hands were still, her face unreadable, but her eyes were locked on him. Thomas reached over, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, you all right?" Jeffrey's hands trembled. His wineglass slipped from his grasp and shattered against the floor, dark red spilling like blood across the cream carpet. He slumped forward suddenly, face pale and sweat beading across his temple. Then his body gave out completely, collapsing sideways off the chair and hitting the hardwood with a sickening thud. Joan screamed. Thomas leapt to the floor, shouting his father's name, trying to lift his head. I froze, just for a second, then rushed to the other side to help. Evelyn didn't move. She stood behind her chair, hands gripping the backrest, her face eerily calm. Her lips parted, but no words came. And then, with deliberate slowness, she reached for her phone. "I'll call an ambulance," she said, as if reading from a script. As Thomas shouted details down the line, and I cradled Jeffrey's head with a napkin pressed to his damp forehead, I couldn't stop my heart from pounding. Not just with fear, but with something else. Suspicion. This wasn't a stroke. This wasn't exhaustion or wine or age. This was something deliberate, something placed, something planned. Jeffrey had drunk from my glass, the one Evelyn had handed to me herself. And now, he was unconscious on the floor. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Jeffrey was rushed into the night on a stretcher. But as they wheeled him out, I glanced once more at Evelyn. She stood motionless in the doorway, the storm raging outside behind her. And on her face, for just a moment, I saw it, not fear, but fury. The hospital smelled like bleach and tension. Harsh white lights illuminated everything. The antiseptic floors, the worried faces, the clipped footsteps of nurses and doctors rushing past with charts. Thomas paced endlessly in the waiting room, wringing his hands, his phone vibrating every few minutes with updates from his sister, his aunt, and God knows who else. I sat still, cold, my coat still damp from the rain. Hours passed before the doctor appeared. Jeffrey was stable. He would recover, but they needed to keep him overnight for observation. They'd run tests, of course. Routine. Except one of those tests came back with something that was anything but routine. A sedative, a powerful, fast-acting one, enough to disorient, to cause confusion, muscle weakness, and, in a man Jeffrey's age, collapse. Thomas nearly dropped his phone. A sedative? Are you sure? The doctor nodded. We're absolutely certain. At first, everyone assumed it had been a mistake, a medication mix-up, a bad reaction to something he'd taken earlier in the day. Jeffrey, still groggy, insisted he hadn't touched anything unusual. No pills, no supplements, nothing out of the ordinary. That left one possibility: the wine. The one glass poured in a separate room, the one handed to me, and the one Jeffrey had drunk instead. When I said the words aloud, the room fell silent. Thomas stared at me. Are you saying? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because 2 hours later, the police arrived to ask questions. And Evelyn, elegant, poised Evelyn, broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply exhaled, sat back in her chair, and confessed like she was ordering tea. It wasn't supposed to be him, she said, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. It was meant for Amelia, just a small dose, to calm her down. Thomas went rigid beside me. What? Evelyn smiled faintly, but her eyes were cold. You know how emotional she gets, always jumping to conclusions, accusing me of things. I thought if she overreacted again, you might finally see how unstable she really is. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't about peace or reconciliation. This was about sabotage. She was going to cause a scene, Evelyn continued, her voice level, almost clinical. You never saw it, Thomas, but I've known from the beginning. She's not like us. She doesn't belong. And sooner or later, she'll pull you away from everything you are. I did what I had to do to protect you, to protect our family. I stared at her, stunned. It wasn't madness. It was calculation. She hadn't just drugged a drink. She had laid a trap. One where I would be the emotional wife, the dramatic outsider, possibly screaming or passing out during dinner. Then, in front of the people who mattered most, she would point and say, "See, I told you." She wanted to isolate me, discredit me, maybe even convince Thomas that I needed help, medication, time away, anything to make my voice smaller, my presence less threatening. But the drink had gone to the wrong person, and now her mask had finally cracked. The officers took her statement, their expressions unreadable. Evelyn was calm, cooperative, even graceful as she explained her twisted logic. She framed it as an act of desperation. No one listens to reason anymore, she said. Sometimes you have to show people the truth. But the truth was now hers to face. She was escorted out of the hospital under quiet watch. No handcuffs, not yet. But the weight of what she'd done followed her like a storm cloud. Thomas couldn't speak. Not to me, not to anyone. I placed a hand gently on his shoulder. He didn't pull away, but he didn't look at me either. His world had fractured in the span of a single dinner. Mine had been fracturing for much longer, but now, finally, he could see the cracks. And as the rain began to fall again outside the hospital window, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The truth had unfolded, not just about Evelyn, but about everything. Her need to control, her hatred wrapped in manners, her obsession with preserving a legacy that no longer fit the world we lived in. She hadn't tried to kill me, but what she did was something just as dangerous. She tried to erase me. Prominent Surrey socialite charged with attempted poisoning of daughter-in-law. Hartwell family scandal rocks local community. Twisted dinner plot exposed in shocking turn of events. Our family name, once whispered with admiration in country clubs and charity galas, was now being dissected in newsrooms and online forums. The Hartwells, a family once defined by elegance, discretion, and social status, had become the center of a public storm. Evelyn was formally charged with attempted poisoning, and while she awaited trial, she was released on bail. The media swarmed her every appearance, huddled outside courtrooms, hounding her solicitor, flashing cameras like lightning strikes. But Evelyn never flinched. She wore shame like she wore her pearls, quietly, but with a pride that defied collapse. In her mind, she was still right. She had acted to protect her son, to preserve the family. But there was no family left to preserve. Jeffrey moved out of Hartwell House within a week of returning from the hospital. He hadn't said much in public, but I'll never forget the way he looked at Evelyn the day she was escorted home under police supervision, not with anger, but with disbelief. As if he were finally seeing the woman he'd shared a life with for who she truly was. Joan stopped visiting. The cousins distanced themselves. Even Thomas's sister, who once clung to every word Evelyn said, sent a letter from abroad saying she needed time and space. Time and space. That's what we all needed. Thomas and I returned to our home in London in silence. For days we moved around each other like ghosts, brushing past one another in the kitchen, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, sleeping in the same bed but feeling miles apart. He was devastated, not just by his mother's actions, but by the realization that he hadn't seen any of it coming, that he had doubted me. One night, he finally spoke. "I let her convince me you were the problem," he whispered, eyes rimmed red. "I let her twist things, and I didn't see it until it was almost too late." I didn't need him to apologize. I needed him to stand beside me. And to his credit, he did. When the press pushed for interviews, he refused. When Evelyn tried to send letters through her solicitor, he returned them unopened. And when the trial date was announced, he told me, "We'll face this together." But even as we stood together, I knew something had broken beyond repair. The illusion of the Hartwells as a proud, perfect family, flawless, untouchable, was gone. The masks had fallen, and beneath them there was only dysfunction, silence, and control disguised as love. And yet, in the middle of the wreckage, I felt something strange. Freedom. For the first time in years, I no longer felt watched. I no longer had to tiptoe, second guess every word, brace for every veiled insult or passive-aggressive smile. The truth had scorched the earth, but in that scorched ground, something honest could finally grow. I had survived her, not just her plan, but her presence, her manipulation, her control. And though the family might never look the same again, I had reclaimed something far more precious than reputation. I had reclaimed myself. Sometimes the most dangerous people in our lives don't come with raised voices or clenched fists. They come dressed in pearls, offering a glass of wine with a smile. They speak in compliments that cut and deliver kindness like poison, slowly, carefully, deliberately. Evelyn Hartwell didn't try to kill me, but she did try to erase me. And in many ways, that's even more insidious. Her weapon wasn't rage, it was controlled. Her battlefield wasn't war, it was the dinner table. And her motive, power, legacy, and the fear of losing influence over the son she molded like a museum artifact. But the truth is, people like Evelyn exist everywhere. In offices, in friendships, in families. They hide behind politeness, they manipulate through reputation, and they convince you, slowly, that you are the one unraveling, that your instincts are wrong, that your voice is too loud, your boundaries too dramatic, your presence too disruptive. The lesson I learned through this, painfully and publicly, is that trusting your gut is not paranoia, it's self-preserving. When something feels off, when the air in a room changes and your skin prickles for no logical reason, listen. Don't wait for proof. Don't wait until it's almost too late. We are taught, especially as women, to be polite, agreeable, accommodating, even when we're in danger. I'm grateful I chose instinct over etiquette that night. Another hard truth. Not everyone will stand by you when the mask falls. Some people prefer the illusion. They're more comfortable with dysfunction wrapped in tradition than truth that challenges their comfort. And that's okay. Let them go. Because when you walk through fire, you don't come out the same. And not everyone is meant to walk with you on the other side. Thomas and I are still healing. Trust, once fractured, doesn't repair itself overnight. But in the silence that followed the storm, we found something fragile and honest, a beginning built on truth rather than legacy. We still don't speak of Evelyn often, but when we do, we speak plainly. No more tiptoeing. I share this not as a tale of scandal or revenge, but as a reminder. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most threatened by your strength, and sometimes the family you marry into isn't the family you stay bound to, but there is freedom on the other side of truth, even if it costs everything. And when you finally breathe in that truth, when the air is clear and your voice no longer trembles, you'll realize the life you're meant to live was never theirs to control in the first place.